right, welcome back to the Word for the Valley podcast, and we're following along with Pastor Mike through the Gospel of Matthew. Now, after the feeding of the 5,000, something dangerous begins to happen. Dangerous not because of persecution or lack, but because the crowd misreads Jesus. John's Gospel tells us that they were ready to take him by force and make him king. And not the king he truly is, but the king they wanted. And right in that moment, Jesus does something surprising. He immediately sends his disciples away in a boat, removing them from the pressure, the misunderstanding, and the momentum of the crowd that was heading in the wrong direction. Let's take a closer look at this as we follow along with Pastor Mike in chapter 14, verse 22.
So this morning we are making this transition all on the same day of Jesus' life and ministry. It's the same day in which Jesus had heard word, the beginning of chapter 14, that John the Baptist had been executed. That scene that we looked at last week. This great injustice done to Christ's minister, Christ's friend. The disciples coming back at the same time with kind of the excitement of their first missionary journey. Jesus takes the disciples away, it says in Mark, to go to a deserted place to rest a little while. The intended purpose of the day was a little bit of rest. Now, I don't know if you've noticed this, but Jesus seems to define rest differently than I do, right? I usually define rest N-A-P. Is usually how I spell rest, right? A good nap, right, is a restful day, and sometimes it is, but not always. And that maybe that's not actually helping me get to a place where I'm settled, where I'm restored, where I'm benefited. I might have a little bit more sleep in my body, but in regards to my soul or my spirit, it might not be an improvement much at all. And so Jesus' rest here includes the feeding of the 5,000, which we looked at last week. The lesson for the disciples on the backside of it is that they got their own baskets when they left. There were 12 baskets remaining. They themselves, in the midst of the ministry, found themselves more full at the end of it than they were at the beginning of it, is the picture and the lesson there in the feeding of the 5,000. Now, you would look at that and you would say, okay, that's a good day. Let's all go home. Get a good night's sleep. We'll gather together tomorrow and we'll discuss it a little bit, or we'll kind of try to nail out kind of the lessons learned and the principles that need to be employed and these kinds of things, and then we'll kind of get back to work on the next day. Except Jesus recognizes that there's a danger in the feeding of the 5,000, and there's a danger for the disciples in the feeding of the 5,000. And the danger is this, and Matthew doesn't give it to us. John's account does in John chapter 6. The danger was that after this day was over, the crowds, after they had their food, started to murmur amongst themselves, spreading amongst the 5, 10, 15,000 people that are there, that now would be a really good time to go and make Jesus the king of Israel. They want to make him king of Israel, right? Because this is the king that every person on the planet has been looking for, the king that can provide bread out of nothing, right? This is the total 100% benefit welfare system. I don't have to work. I can sit and listen to Jesus, and I get fed at the end of the day. Good for me, right? Typically, they say amongst elections, the president or whatever election, whatever kind of situation that different political governments in different places of the world do different things, different ways, right? But whichever leader can guarantee the most resources in the pocket of the people usually wins the election. Whoever can secure that, whoever can guarantee that, whoever people think is going to benefit them most on the backside, whether it's right or wrong, typically. It's almost entirely pragmatic, right? Whoever gives me the most bread will probably be the next king. Whoever can guarantee me the most stability and the most benefit from myself will probably be the next president. Whoever the majority of the people in this country believe is that person, they will probably get elected. Well, the people are reckoning Jesus in that way at this time, right? He has fed us. He has cared for us. He has healed us, right? What kind of army would this be, by the way, right? He could take anybody, send them into battle. If they got struck down, he raised them back up. If they got hit, he healed them. I mean, you couldn't start like a total non-stoppable army. You didn't have to take preparations and food source. He could just supply at any point in time. This is a perfect king in the eyes of the people at this time. The problem is, in designating Christ as the king and desiring him to be the king, it indicates that their perspective about Christ is completely wrong at this point in time. That this is not who Jesus intended to be. This is what they want him to be. Right? They want him to be the bread king. Grandpa Stroman, or whatever, Bimbo Bakery, whatever. They want him to be the guy. So Jesus then, it says in verse 22 of chapter 14 here, that he immediately made his disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. It says in John that he constrained his disciples, which means he laid hands on them, right? Now, that's not the Pentecostal charismatic way of laying hands on somebody, right? He grabbed Peter by the scruff of the neck and put him in the boat, right? He grabbed John and James by their arms and physically put them into the boat. So at the end of this day, feeding of the 5,000, the guys are getting scolded, right? Knock it off. Stop talking this way. Get in the boat, kind of thing, right? And then Jesus gets his 12 disciples into the boat and shoves the thing out into the water. Just go. Don't talk. Be quiet. I don't want to hear you anymore. You're wrong. Get out. Go. Now, little do they know that he is sending them straight into a storm. And it's important to recognize that as we move forward here, that this storm is not necessarily one where they're getting it because they're bad or they're getting it because whatever, they're being disciplined in some ways. God's obviously going to use this to teach them, right? But this is a part of God's desire in their lives for their benefit. For their benefit. I think one of the things that we all have to learn is that the storms of life are not necessarily bad. If we use them the right way, if we learn from them the right way, if we grow from them the right way, actually, in some ways, the storms of life will be our greatest assets. They'll be our greatest benefits. We will learn the greatest lessons in the most painful seasons of life. I don't know if you've noticed this. When life is easy and smooth and everything's good, it's easy to sit back a little bit, relax a little bit, have fun a little bit, and maybe take our foot off the pedal in regards to our relationship with the Lord or our service of the Lord in some ways. And then a storm comes and we're like, oh, that's right, I need to pray. Oh, that's right, I should study the Bible. Oh, that's right, Jesus is still, oh, that's right, heaven is still a reality. Oh, I get it now. And that's a very important lesson to learn and to have drilled down into our lives. And so Jesus sends them out. At the meantime, then he sends the rest of the multitudes away. Now, he just basically tells them to go home, right? Because Jesus goes up into the mountain. Then it says in verse 23, when he had sent the multitudes away, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. Now, this is also very interesting. Jesus gets a little bit of a break from all of the people and the activity of the day, right? You would think that he would go up there and watch the sunset, zone out a little bit, take it easy, put his feet up, right? But he recognizes that to stay in touch with the Lord, with the Father, to be refilled for whatever ministry comes next, that in some ways the greater benefit was to pray. The greater blessing was to pray. So he went up to the mountain and he talked with the Father. And the Father talked with him. And he spent some time in fellowship, in communion, in prayer with God, Jesus himself. Now it says when evening came that he was alone there. It's because he sent everybody else away. Finally, he gets his rest time. Nobody else is around. But the boat, it says, was now in the middle of the sea. Now, the Sea of Galilee is not that big. The middle of the sea can at most be about 3.5 miles away from the shore at any one point in time in the Sea of Galilee. It's not that big of a sea. The problem is they made 3.5 miles in about 9 hours of rowing. They've rowed from sunset all the way clear through to about 3 to 6 a.m., which is the fourth watch of the night, which is mentioned here in verse 25. They've rowed all night for 3.5 miles. You could get across the Sea of Galilee in an hour or two. Typically, it wasn't even that big a deal, especially if the winds were behind you. It'd be a pretty easy trip. Peter, James, and John have fished this sea. They know this sea. The day before, Jesus and the disciples had crossed the sea just to get to the other side, to come to the place where the 5,000 were and the feeding of the 5,000 occurred, right? They'd made this trip 1,000,000 times. But something else happened here in the middle of this trip. It says the boat was in the middle of the sea, tossed by the winds, for the wind, or tossed by the waves, for the wind was contrary. Now, it's not that uncommon on the Sea of Galilee because of the way the mountain range sits to the north, that the winds can come down onto the Sea of Galilee and stir up some significant waves. For a relatively small lake, small sea, I've seen pictures already, 10 feet waves, 10-foot waves on a sea, just because of the winds and the kind of the way the sea can get stirred up. It can be fairly significant. Right? They joke about people surfing on the Sea of Galilee, right? Which you don't do on our little lake over here, when they eventually when they get the dam up, right? There'll be a lake over there again, kind of thing. But you don't see that in a setting like that very often. It just so happens, though, that the way kind of everything sits there, that it can happen like that from time to time. Now, whether this is a natural storm or a supernatural storm, we don't know. It may, in fact, be that there's some other forces at work to create this kind of windstorm, because it's one of those storms that holds them right in the middle of the sea, right? They row for 8 hours, 9 hours, and they're in the middle of the sea. They keep rowing, and they stay right there, right? Have you ever had one of those dreams? When I was a kid, it was always the Incredible Hulk. I don't know why. Long before Marvel and CGI and all this because the Incredible Hulk in my dream was big, right? And about halfway through the dream, I'm running, and the Incredible Hulk is gaining on me, right? Because he's going to eat me. And you're running and running and running, but you ain't making any progress. And you're like, oh, he's going to kill me. But the dream goes on and on forever. It's like one of those crazy, weird scenes because he comes up and he gets what comes. Why does it keep happening like this? And wake up, and then you just realize it's a dream, which is fine, right? Except that this is not a dream. They are rowing and rowing and rowing, right? And they are making no progress. They're actually rowing so they don't get pushed back into the other shore, which we don't think that would ever happen because this storm has them stuck. And they need to be there. They need to be stuck. They need to be at a place where they can't rescue themselves, where they can't deliver themselves, where they can't figure it out themselves. They need to be at that place. Listen, this is very hard for us sometimes. I don't think it's all that hard for God to get us to a place where we don't really know what we're doing. I don't know why it takes so long for us to get there. I think God probably knew from the start that we didn't know what we were doing, right? But somehow or another, we've done the sea before. We're fishermen. We know boats. We can do this. And we keep fighting and fighting and fighting until we realize, you know what? I don't know that I really know what I'm doing here. Right? And then remarkably, God can step in. God can step in. Which is the point of this whole scene. The wind was contrary. Now, it says in verse 25, in the fourth watch of the night, again, 3 to 6 a.m., that Jesus went to them walking on the sea. Now, we're told in Mark that when he saw them from the shore, he could actually watch them straining at the oars or trying to row. Now, that's 3.5 miles of vision through a wind rainstorm where everything is so boisterous and crazy. There's something supernatural happening as Jesus is watching them. And you get the sense he had been watching them all night. That's probably why he was praying. He knew they were going to struggle here. He knew this was going to be difficult. One of the hard things about being a parent, kind of almost willfully and at times deliberately, pushing your kids out a little bit, knowing that it's going to hurt them. You need to learn here. You need to try here. You need to even go out and fail here if necessary. But to kind of push them out there, but then to hang back at home and kind of watch over them, pray over them, be concerned over them, kind of be ready to address whatever situations come up next. It's very much what Jesus is doing for his own disciples here. When he pushes them out into the storm, it's not as if he doesn't care. And it's not as if he just forgets about them. Like he's so overwhelmed by the day, he doesn't want to have any more work to do. So just get out of my hair. I don't want to see you anymore. It's not that at all. He pushes them out into the storm because there's a lesson for them in the storm that they couldn't have learned on the shore. They're actually in some ways going to get more benefit out of the storm lesson than they got out of the feeding of the 5,000 lesson. Right? And he cares about them the whole time. Right? It's remarkable that God is caring for us when we're not even caring for him. God is oftentimes thinking about us when we're not thinking about him. God is praying for us when we're not praying to him. His concern for us is much more probably than we will ever understand. He's watching them in the storm. He's watching them straining. He's watching Peter yell at John. You need to pull harder. We're going in circles. We're not going in circles. We're just stuck. We're not making any progress. You need to, okay, somebody else, tap in. Your turn to row kind of thing. Like he's watching the whole thing play out over hours. And then he decides to walk out to them. Now, I got a lot of questions, right? Most of them is, I would like to see the scene. I hope that there is some type of replay in heaven, right? Some type of, reverse back. You see this thing go, on recorder, right? What, DVD, VCR? What do you think heaven has? 8-track? I don't know. But however this whole thing is recorded, and to watch this whole thing, Jesus is watching them, praying for them, walks down off of the mountain, watching the disciples out in the storm. He goes out onto the beach, watching his disciples out in the storm. And then he decides to just keep on walking right out onto the water. And I've always wondered, was it a hoverboard? Was he 2 inches above the water? Was he 2 inches below the water? Did he walk on the water, but it still splashed up over to his knees where his robe was getting wet at the bottom? I hate getting wet feet. That's my the worst thing in the world. The thing I hate worst about shoveling snow is wet feet. Almost anything, I'd rather have wet than feet. And once the feet get wet, I feel wet all over. I hate it, right? Did the hem of his garment get wet? Did his hair get wet? Did somehow or another he stay dry the whole way? And there's this little kind of protective covering over him. These kind of, I don't know. And why walk? Why not teleport? You could have done anything. We're going to find at the end of this scene, Jesus gets into the boat. The boat immediately goes to the shore. Somehow or another, they blink and they are there. And they're all like, what just happened? They're dripping dry, but what's just happening kind of thing. Jesus could have teleported there. He could have gone, boom, right there next to these disciples. He just decides to walk the 3.5 miles, which means that this is going to take some time for him to get there, all the while he's watching them. He walks out to them. It says in verse 26, when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, that they were troubled. That's an understatement, right? They were already soaking wet, so they couldn't really soil themselves any further than what they were already soiled, but they were scared. They were troubled, saying, it is a ghost. You can almost imagine this, right? As Jesus gets within 1.5 miles of the boat, the thunder claps, the lightning strikes, the storms, and the disciples, did you see that? Did you see that? And it's only the ones rowing, by the way, because they would have been looking back, right? Did you see it? See what? There's something out there. There's nothing out there. Come on, we've been out here for 8 hours. What are you talking about? And so they're like, oh, look over there. Did you see it? It's a little closer this time, right? We're not going to die by drowning. We're going to die by ghost. This is, what is that? And it gets closer and closer at walking pace. Now, it's one of those slow motion attacks too. And those, like in the movies or something, just die already. I want this whole scene to be over. Just slowly creeping up on them kind of thing. They can't go. They're rolling. They can't move. And he just gets closer and closer and closer. And they think it's a ghost. It says they cried out for fear. It's literally they shrieked. I don't know if you've ever heard a guy shriek, but it's quite a thing, right? For fear. But as Jesus gets close, now it's interesting in Mark, it says that he made as if he would walk right by them. He's on the sea, but he's in the passing lane, right? You guys just hang out right here. I'm going to go over there. And when the day's over, we'll meet up eventually. Like, what is he doing? Why is he going to go by them? Right? Except that he just wants them to know that he knows what's going on in their lives. He just wants them to know that he knows. And so he's going to go right on by them and get to the other side. And eventually, when the storm dies down and the whole thing is over, eventually the disciples will come there too. Apparently was the plan. Now they cry out for fear, and immediately Jesus spoke to them as he gets close enough to communicate to them despite this windstorm. He says, "Be of good cheer." Cheer up, buddies. I hate when Jesus does this kind of stuff, right? It's been an 8-hour night. When was the last time you couldn't sleep for 8 hours? After a day of ministry where you fed 15,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fish. Where you just got back from the previous day's ministry where you were so excited that you couldn't hardly sleep from the previous day's ministry. And now here you are, you can't sleep because you've been in the storm, fighting the waves, just trying to get to the side. Something comes, you think it's a ghost, you realize it's Jesus. He says, "Hey, just cheer up." Like, you just shut up. What do you mean, just cheer up? Be of good cheer. Be of good cheer. Why? He says, it is I. It's literally I am, by the way. I am. Do not be afraid. Right? If you do this to a friend, you probably could get smacked in the mouth, which you might actually deserve. It's been a really rough day. It's hard. It's difficult. Oh, just cheer up, right? Turn that frown upside down, whack, you kind of thing. I'll turn your frown upside down, or I'll turn your smile upside down, kind of thing. And that you kind of get that kind of reaction. Just smile, it's okay. Don't worry, be happy. Boo, doo, doo, kind of thing. And you just got this whole kind of vibe going on. The only thing that makes this possible is not merely the words spoken. Smile, it's okay. All things work together for good, brother, kind of thing. No, it's that he's there. He's there. Be of good cheer. It's me. I am here. I am. Do not be afraid. Now, Christ's presence now has become very real to these guys. So much so in verse 28 that Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." Now, this is a remarkable request from a man that oftentimes speaks well out over his skis, right? Says things long before he realizes what he's even really talking about. We don't know where this comes from, but obviously he wasn't thinking, right? There are a million different ways to verify that this is Jesus. The easiest of them would be, "Lord, hop in our boat." It's nice to see you. Come on in. Take your turn at the oars. Something like this. The easiest way to verify the reality of Jesus would not be for Peter to get out onto the water. Now, I've oftentimes wondered, right? If this was me, I'd say, "Lord, if it's you, command John to come to you on the water," right? See how it goes. Good job, buddy. Thanks for volunteering. Let's get out there and see how this goes, right? And what does Peter think he's going to do? Is this not ice skating? He's going to go out and do some pirouettes, do a little spin about, kind of just walk on the water like it's surfing or skiing or something. Like what does he think he's going to do? What benefit to him is this? Except he says, command me to come to you. The only benefit that Peter gets out of this is that he gets to be closer to Jesus than the rest of the disciples are at this present time. Command me, not just to walk on, he doesn't say, command me to walk on the water. He says, command me to come to you. It just so happens the only way I can do that is to be on the water. That's just a secondary thing. Command me to come to you. So Jesus said, come. Now, Jesus didn't require this of Peter. I think this is an important point, and I think Oswald Chambers just made this point this morning in his My Utmost for His Highest reading for today, is that there are some things in regards to your fellowship with the Lord there are some things, even in regards to your service of God, that you get to volunteer for, right? It reminds me very much of Isaiah in Isaiah chapter 6. He's given this vision of God, right? The train of the robe filling the temple there in this vision. And he hears God talking amongst the angels, the seraphim, whom shall I send and who will go for us? He's not asking Isaiah, hey, will you go for us? It's just fellowship amongst the Godhead. It's just fellowship amongst heaven, so to speak. Hey, who shall I send and who will go for us? And Isaiah volunteers. Here am I, send me. I think a lot of times in our life and relationship with the Lord that we need to be very careful. One, that we don't presume, right? Because I think sometimes in and around the church, people get presumptuous and they think that they can be and do something that God's not equipped them to be and do, right? You don't want to do any ministry that God's not equipped you to do. If you do, you're going to look foolish. It's going to be empty. And even if you're successful, it will yield no long-standing fruit. The only ministry you want to do in the Lord is the ministry that he has equipped you, filled you, prepared you, designed for you to do, right? But at the same time, we need to be very, very careful that we don't go to such the degree where we say then, okay, God, I will only do what you require me to do, right? And I won't be a pastor unless you make me. When I'm not sure he's ever really made anybody, right? There has to be some measure of willful surrender and submission, and even somewhat of a desire for that level of fellowship and for that level of service for it to become a reality in this person's life. Peter didn't need to step out on the water. God didn't tell him to step out on the water. It wasn't an expectation. It wasn't a calling. It wasn't anything. Except that it was motivated out of Peter's heart to be as close to Jesus in the middle of the storm as he could be. And the only way for that to happen is to get out onto the water.
We learned that Peter didn't have to step out of the boat. God didn't command it. The invitation came because Peter wanted to be closer to Jesus in the middle of the storm. And sometimes the only way to get nearer to him is to step out into places we can't stand on without him. So as we wrap up this part of the chapter, may we learn to listen for God's leading, but also cultivate a heart that's willing to say, Lord, if it's you, let me come to you. All right, that's all for now. Thanks for listening to the Word for the Valley podcast. So long, everyone.